So was anyone surprised to learn today during the Words for All Ages that ants farm? Just show of hands if you didn't know that. You were all pretty well acquainted in all things ant. I'm impressed, because I didn't learn that until fairly recently, maybe within the last 5 years, and it kind of blew my mind. Ants are amazing. They build highways. I learned that on the radio last year. Of course, the individual ants don't build highways. They're just like following chemical trails. But the colony of ants, they build actual highways that run for enormous distances in ant terms, but still we're talking about a couple of miles so that they can better transport their goods and services back and forth. And they farm. Lots of ants farm. Several hundred species all over the world, including here in the Americas. And they've been doing it for a long time, 30 million years. Do you know how long humans have been farming? Not 30 million years. Ants have been farming since back when our human ancestors were like a small little rodent thing, dreaming that one day it would evolve into a slightly bigger little rodent thing. So the leafcutter ants, they cut the pieces off of the trees and they take it down underground and chew it up and spread it out. And they grow the fungus and they harvest the fungus. And this is a symbiotic relationship because, of course, the fungus is feeding the ants, but the ants are also feeding the fungus. And they're also doing a lot of really elaborate things to provide that fungus with a congenial environment. In the more sophisticated versions of this farming arrangement, the ants and the fungus have evolved to be so interdependent that they can no longer survive without one another. The fungus can't live outside of the underground climate. They also can't reproduce in the wild. So they have essentially become domesticated fungus. And the ants actually stop producing an amino acid that they need because the fungus supplies them with that amino acid. But without the fungus, they would no longer be able to live. So the relationship has become so interdependent that biologists now argue that it is really hard to say exactly who it is that is farming whom. Now, of course, as our Words for All Ages demonstrated, there's a third player in this relationship, and that is the tree, or trees. And leafcutter ants really do avoid stressing out the trees because stressed trees release a damaging chemical into their leaves, and then the leaves can no longer grow the mushrooms. It becomes unsuitable for farming. So the trees are a critical component of the ants' ecosystem, and the ants have had to learn via evolution how to farm sustainably within that ecosystem. So that's what they do. And the ants' dependence on the tree means that really they are connected to many more parts of the forest than they will ever interact with, because the health and prosperity of the trees relies on the health and prosperity of the forest, which is a product of innumerable factors, not the least of which is whether someday a particular species of hairless primate is going to come along and chop down the entire forest, the better to raise cattle for Big Mac-related purposes. Now, as long as we're talking about fungus and forests, I want to take a quick little detour into some surprising things that we are learning today about the connections that exist in forests. Because our topic today is not really about ants and fungus and trees, it's about interdependence and connection. Our worship theme for the month is roots and branches, which means we're going to be talking about our connections in life, both to sources of life that ground and sustain us, like the earth, for example, but also our connections to one another and to other living beings. One of the things that I really admire and find intellectually and spiritually challenging about Unitarian Universalism, about this religion, is that it is simultaneously a religion that celebrates individuality and personal freedom, while also recognizing that life is about relationship, and that we attain the full flowering of our humanity within community, which includes the larger community of all living things. Our religion assumes our interdependence with one another and with the web of life as the most basic fact of our existence. And it encourages us not to run away from that fact, but to lean into it, to embrace it, and to celebrate it. So trees and forests. Scientists in the last few decades have been gathering more and more evidence that plant life in forests, trees included, is much more interconnected than we had ever imagined. And fungus, of all things, plays a key role. Now, we've known for a long time, probably 100 years, that underneath the forest floor at the root level, there's this incredibly complex web made up of long strands of fungus that run through the soil all through the forest. And the fungus burrows into the roots of the trees. And so the trees are all connected, root to root, all through the forest by these network of fungus. Now the fungus, excuse me, it's called a mycorrhizal network. And the fungus gathers up water and nitrogen and all these important things that the trees need, and it provides it to the trees through the roots. And the roots, in return, the trees provide the fungus with sugars that the trees can make through photosynthesis, which fungus can't do. So what we have at the base level is a very basic, again, symbiotic relationship between the trees and the fungus. But thanks to the pioneering work by biologists like Suzanne Simard, we're learning that once the trees are all networked together by this fungus network, they can not only exchange chemicals and nutrients with the fungus, they can exchange these things with one another. And they can also send messages to one another through this fungal network. They can, and they do. So trees are communicating with one another about threats in their environment so that they can better respond. Trees can pass nutrients to other trees that temporarily need more assistance or to enable saplings the better to grow. They are beginning to identify so-called mother trees, which are the oldest trees in the forest that have the most connections. And they're doing experiments now. Some scientists think that these mother trees can actually recognize their own kin, their tree babies, through this network, the better to pass them nutrients and to support them. So some scientists believe are starting to call this the wood wide web, because this fungus network is essentially the internet for trees. And what we are learning is that there's rich communication happening in nature all around us, right under our feet. And until recently, it was totally invisible to us. Totally invisible to us. So I find this idea so exciting, I could barely contain myself when I first learned about this, right? But it makes me wonder, what else are we not seeing? What other relationships, what other dependencies and interdependencies are we not perceiving, are invisible to us? The more we learn about life, the more we learn that it is, as the saying goes, so fearfully and wondrously made, so marvelously complex and interrelated in ways we never expected, never imagined, can barely comprehend sometimes. And it is awesome, but it should also be a little humbling. It should be a little humbling, because what else are we missing? It should give us a little pause, perhaps, before we charge ahead with our plans and our projects. But we do charge ahead. That's what we do. Life does not stand still. Generations build on generations. There's another dimension of interdependence in this picture, and that is interdependence through time. In the case of our fungus farming ants, each generation of ants is at the mercy of the generation that came before it, that they will have done all of this painstaking work to grow the fungus in a sustainable way. And it is painstaking work. The fungus have to grow in this practically completely sanitary environment, or else bacterial contamination will happen. So the ants are constantly cleaning the environment, and they've actually come up with a way to secrete antibiotics all over the place to kill bacteria. And waste management is a huge problem if you were a fungus farming ant, and they do it in really sophisticated ways, right? And if they don't do all those things, the next generation will be totally out of luck. But on the other hand, each present generation is also reliant on the future generation to carry their good work forward, so that it does not end up all having been for nothing. So the generations need each other. They are in an interdependent relationship across time. Ants, of course, do these things automatically, by instinct, shaped by millennia of evolution. We humans, of course, do not do these things by instinct. And this is a great blessing, and it is also a curse, because we can innovate with tremendous speed, unrivaled in nature, except for maybe some bacteria and viruses. But with that freedom to innovate comes the capacity to profoundly screw things up. Profoundly. Now, I'm not meaning to romanticize the old ways just because they're old. I like change and innovation. At the same time, we must recognize that we are rooted in complex and sometimes fragile ecosystems that we do not fully comprehend. And sometimes our lack of comprehension can lead to widespread and destructive consequences for the environment. A Unitarian ecologist, Rachel Carson, recognized this in the 1960s. Right? She was a science writer. She mostly made a living writing popular books about the sea. But she came to understand how the widespread spraying of DDT and other chemicals was destroying marine ecosystems very far removed from the places where the chemicals were being sprayed. These chemicals weren't being sprayed maliciously. The intent was to kill mosquitoes to control malaria and to control pests that were destroying crops. Right? So these were good intentions, but they had extremely destructive outcomes. Now, the old pagan religions of the West, pre-scientific as they were, believed that nature is always to be approached with awe and respect and humility and maybe even a little bit of fear. Our modern scientific view is full of awe, but it is short on humility, and our economic systems have completely ditched any last vestige of respect. So we have moved beyond sustainability into rapid and rampant exploitation with little thought or regard for the consequences. And so today we are facing an ecological crisis, which means since we live in that ecosystem, we are also facing a human crisis. And the outlines of this crisis have been clear for decades, right? Species extinction, deforestation, stressed ecosystems, climate change. In response to this crisis, the United Nations drafted what is called an Earth Charter in the last decade of the 20th century. And this drafting process involved years of conversation with scientists and legal experts and religious thinkers and ethicists all around the world. The charter is not legally binding on any nation. It was created to be a moral document to call our attention to a need for new ways of ecological thought and behavior. So it reads in part, the resilience of the community of life and the well-being of humanity depend upon preserving a healthy biosphere with all its ecological systems, a rich variety of plants and animals, fertile soil, pure waters, and clean air. The global environment with its finite resources is a common concern of all people. The protection of the Earth's vitality, diversity, and beauty is a sacred trust. Eco-theologian Jay McDaniel says the Earth Charter points to an urgent need for a values revolution to replace what he calls the global civic religion of consumerism. He writes that consumer culture now forms a global civic society of sorts, albeit an unhealthy one. Participants do not know each other, yet they share a set of common values and a common hope. The values are appearance, affluence, and marketable achievement, understood as a central organizing principle for life. Right? Appearance, affluence, and marketable achievement as the central organizing principle of life. The hope is for endless material acquisition without ever having to say enough. The Earth Charter, he says, envisions another kind of society based on a common hope for a sustainable future. Now, to get to this sustainable future, McDaniel points out, we need to form sustainable communities, and that requires scientific work and spiritual work. The scientific work is to understand the systems and the technologies of sustainable living, right? How to use energy more wisely, how to build cities and transportation networks, and agriculture and all of these things, how to arrange our affairs in a way that minimizes the harm to the earth, and how to better conserve the resources of the earth. That's the scientific problem. The spiritual work is needed to change our relationship to the earth and all living things. There's a change of heart and mind needed to take us beyond the habits of consumer culture, which sees the earth and other living things as a mere resource, as a commercial tool, as a means for meeting our immediate needs. We need to understand the earth as sacred and its living inhabitants as our kin. In short, we need a new spiritual relationship with the earth that is based on respect, gratitude, compassion, and a deep appreciation for our interrelatedness and interdependence with nature, of whose creative powers we are but one beautiful expression among so much beauty. We need a fundamentally new understanding of our roots and our branches as a people. Now, this new way of relating to the world is very much in alignment with Unitarian Universalist values. Through our seventh principle, we commit ourselves already to respect for the interdependent web of life of which we are a part. And we get to this principle from different places, depending on our theological background. Right? Our scientific humanist tradition emphasizes that all life grows out of the same natural process of cosmic creation and evolution, that all living things are quite literally kin. We are ancestors, right? And worthy of respect and wonder. Our theist tradition sees a god or a goddess or a spirit of love that is present in all things and cares for all things and loves all things. And many pagan or earth-centered traditions also see spirit in all things and remind us of the necessity of living in balance with the forces of life and creation. So we get here from many different places, but we share this commitment to the interdependent web. At the same time, we're all learners, right? We're learning. We're learning how to live out these new ideas and these ideals, how to support them in communities, including here at UUI, how to communicate these values to others. Now, Jay McDaniel says we need nothing less than a new civic culture, a new default way of seeing the world. And creating that kind of cultural change is not quick or easy work, especially when we don't know exactly what it even looks like because we're still learning. And some people are hostile to the very idea. We know some of what it looks like. We know it means treating the earth as important and sacred in its own right, not just as a handy source to make iPhone X's. We know it means teaching our children wonder and respect for the complex web of living relationships around them. We know it means extending kindness and compassion beyond our human relationships to all of our ecological relationships. And we know it means taking climate change seriously as the showstopper of ecological disruptions. It means trying to live in such a way that our children's children bless our name and bless the garden that we have faithfully tended for them. Connections are made slowly, says the poet Marge Piercy. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. Now more than ever, the vision and values of Unitarian Universalism are desperately needed in the world. Not only that we are beautiful and worthy of love, but that we are deeply connected to the mystery and marvel of life in a dance that is ancient and sacred, and we are called to participate in that dance in a way that is healthy and holy, and that supports life and creativity. And people want to be connected to a vision like that. People want to be connected to something that is meaningful and life-giving and life-sustaining. So may we be grateful to this community and this faith, this religious tradition, that helps us grow and deepen our own connections, our own roots and branches, our connections to one another, to our highest values, to the spirit of life, and to our earth. From that place of rootedness, from the strength of those connections which ground and anchor us, may we be brave and bold in casting the seeds of our new vision out into the world, patiently and faithfully into stony ground and fertile garden alike. Reach out, the poet says. Reach out. Keep reaching out. Keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time, but not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.